It's been nearly 2 years since an assassin's bullet almost changed the course of history, and I'm pleased and honored to be joined this morning by author, journalist, friend of the president, and world-famous political pundit Roger Stone. Roger, welcome back to the show.
Jason, great to be back with you again.
And if I may flatter you for a moment before we get into talking about the assassination attempt in Butler, PA, I don't know if we've ever discussed this, Roger, but you were one of the early inspirations for me creating Crowdsource the Truth. You were one of the first videos I ever did. I went to an event at Books and Books in Florida many years ago, maybe 2016, where you debated a very kind, but I think misguided on this subject, gentleman by the name of Gerald Posner. And for people who might have been living under a rock, you are an expert in political assassinations. You wrote what I think is the definitive book on the JFK assassination. And this is how I first became aware of you reading this book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy. What can you say about the Butler assassination attempt? And of course, the subject I'm most interested in discussing with you, Maxwell Yerrick, and how it relates to JFK and all these political assassinations we've been seeing now.
Well, I think you have to see the attempted assassination of Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, within the context of a series of events that really begins in 1963. I believe, as my New York Times best-selling book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, the case against LBJ, lays out in great detail, that John F. Kennedy was killed as part of a conspiracy with Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson at the helm, but which also included organized crime, Big Texas Oil, and of course, the Central Intelligence Agency. The recent hearings, chaired by Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, demonstrate the CIA has been most misleading about their knowledge of Oswald, their interactions with Oswald. I think there's more than adequate evidence that Oswald is not the shooter from the sixth floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. It's not what we're here to discuss, and it's a conversation for another day. I also believe that Richard Nixon was politically assassinated. He was removed in a silent coup. I think that the deep state thought it was probably too early to shoot and kill another president. So based on declassified documents that have come to the fore in the last 2 years, plus a number of FOIA FBI documents, we now know definitively that the Central Intelligence Agency knew about the Watergate break-in advance, infiltrated the Watergate break-in team. 4 of the 8 Watergate burglars are still working actively for the CIA. There's many questions there. Then, of course, you have the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. I'm working on a book on that, just about ready to wrap it up. If you go ask the government for their documents, everything they give you is essentially redacted. So the American people have never gotten a full report on the attempted assassination of Reagan. What we got was a 2-paragraph statement from Vice President George Bush saying that we searched and there was no conspiracy, that John Hinckley, I have my own questions about that, did conduct drone surveillance of the radius of the event where Trump was speaking. But the local police offered to do a drone surveillance for the Secret Service, which declined. Then the Secret Service themselves were unable to conduct drone surveillance because their operator had no experience with the system. He ended up having to call an 800 number for the manufacturer, in addition to the fact that there was a broken cable. So there was no drone surveillance, which would have revealed what they had over 100 tips on. There was no central command post. The federal, local, and state police all on different radio frequencies. That caused them to miss at least 100 urgent calls that there was a man on the roof of a building with a rangefinder. I find that inexplicable. Now you add to the fact that the rooftop, which had a clear sight of vision of where the president was speaking, should have been searched and sealed. It wasn't. Very much like the Texas School Book Depository building, should have been searched, emptied, and sealed, but wasn't. Uh, Now add to the fact that Thomas Matthew Crook's body is almost immediately cremated, and they almost immediately hose off the roof of the building from which he allegedly shot. That's as if they want to avoid some kind of DNA test. Now, add to the additional questions here. He was found with some kind of transmitter on his person, which was allegedly connected to explosives in his car, which was never set off. Um, you raise the same question I do, and that is shortly after I heard of the shooting, and I got that feeling in the pit of my stomach that I got when I heard that Ronald Reagan had been shot. I even remembered as a child the same feeling I got when I heard that John F. Kennedy had been shot. I got a tip from a source in the Pennsylvania State Police who indicated to me that the shooter was not Thomas Matthew Crooks, but one Maxwell Urich. Now, let me be very clear. I am not saying here that Maxwell Urich is the shooter. I'm not saying that I have proof that he is the shooter, but I do find it curious that the photos almost everyone has seen of the dead body of the shooter, the ear does not seem to match the photos that they've shown us of Thomas Matthew Crooks. It does more nearly seem to resemble that of Maxwell Urich. Now, add to the fact that Urich had, when I looked him up online, had been arrested for scuffles at various Trump events, had spent a little time in jail over one of them. I simply asked the question here. I don't think that I rather doubt that whoever the shooter is acted alone. All of these Secret Service failures seem to me to be a pretty large number of coincidences. So I asked the question, has anyone investigated Maxwell Urich? Why has Urich been completely and totally silent? Why has he dropped from sight? I gather that his sister has commented publicly that he is not the shooter, but he himself has literally disappeared. Add to this to the fact that they tell us that they cannot find any internet fingerprint for Thomas Matthew Crooks. I think Tucker Carlson disproved that. They told us that Crooks' phone was encrypted and the FBI had no way to break that encryption. Find that hard to believe as well. So very much like the Kennedy assassination, where 50 years later, 50 plus years later, we're still trying to figure out exactly who killed JFK. I still don't think that this is a settled question. If you go, of course, to AI, whether it's Grok or Chat GPT, and you ask about Maxwell Urich, they'll simply say, "Oh well, that was a online theory that was debunked." I say, debunked by who?
I agree with everything you're saying, Roger, and thank you for that explanation. You know, it was your initial tweet that I saw on July 13th, 2024. And I agree with you. We certainly don't have definitive proof that it was Maxwell Urich. You've raised a lot of important points. There are some other points I'd like to discuss. It's not like anybody heard of Maxwell Urich before this. It's certainly a very specific allegation, right? I mean, you didn't know who this guy was before someone told you he was the shooter.
Well, first of all, the source who called me with the Pennsylvania State Police is someone in whom I have confidence. It doesn't mean that they're correct, but it bears certainly bears investigation. I'd never heard of this individual. Anyone can look up his criminal record online. It is there for all to see. But in what world, if you were accused on the internet or any place of being the shooter, would you not come forward and issue a denial? Why would you
Right.
literally disappear from the face of the earth? I just find that extraordinarily odd.
I agree with you completely. And, you know, his sister has, or someone purporting to be his sister, has directly communicated with me, said, you know, it wasn't him, sent me a picture of her with him with some cats. And I said, well, okay, I mean, I don't doubt that his sister would have access to photographs of him that aren't widely available on the internet, but how do I know that photograph wasn't taken on July 12th? I don't understand why Maxwell Urich wouldn't come out. I've been quite vocal. I basically took the baton that you laid down and I went nuts with the thing. I went to Pittsburgh to an apartment. This is the stuff that I really wanted to discuss with you, Roger, because it's been such a strange set of circumstances here. Because I was speaking about it so much, I was contacted by Douglas, what's his name? Doug Hagman, who basically, I don't speak to Doug Hagman often at all. I've spoken to him in the past, but he called me out of the blue and he said, hey, Jason, I've been to Maxwell Urich's apartment and I spoke to him. He's alive. I said, well, Doug, how did you know it was Max Urich? And he said, because the landlord addressed him as Max. Now, certainly anybody could do that. So I followed up on what Doug said. I went to the apartment that he alleged was Max Urich's home. Nobody answered the door. I had a dash cam, as you could see, in my car. I parked outside the place for hours to observe who would come and go. There were some cars parked there. I saw people leaving restaurants and shops, getting into their cars and leaving. I later went and looked at some Amazon packages that were there at the apartment. They were not addressed to Maxwell Urich. Now, what I do recall, this was about a year ago that I went there. When I looked up this address that Doug Hagman gave me, it wasn't associated with Max Urich. I mean, you know, and many people know, there's all these databases you can subscribe to on the internet to look people up and find their addresses, etc. This address in Pittsburgh was not associated with Maxwell Urich, to my recollection. And that was one of the reasons I was suspicious of what Doug Hagman was telling me. And in preparation for our discussion today, I rekindled my investigation into Maxwell Urich yesterday, and I was calling phone numbers, his cell phone number, his sister, his mother, phone numbers that were associated with him. Now, I noticed when you first made the tweet 2 years ago, I called that cell phone number right away, and it rang, and I was calling it over several days, and it would ring sometimes and go to voicemail, but within a day or so, it just went right to voicemail, as if the battery had died or something like that. Now, certainly if he were shot and the police took his cell phone, you could see the battery running out in a day or two, but the cell phone is still associated with him, and the database that I subscribe to says that this number is associated with him from several years ago through 2025. Which would be after his alleged death. So perhaps that's evidence that he's still alive, or perhaps that's evidence that someone is still paying his cell phone bill. Anyway, I called that cell phone yesterday, and I received a return phone call. Hello?
And
Here it is.
Hello, who's this?
Is this Brian?
Devilishly brilliant. He is
Brian?
really, really
I
good.
was trying to reach Max
He's
Urich.
been practicing for months for this debate. I can tell you.
This is Jason Goodman. Is this
Sorry.
Max?
He broke 4
I've got,
mirrors.
I'm so sorry, Roger. I've got your discussion with the Kennedy assassination going on in the background there. Let me just play this for you again really quickly because it is important and I want you to hear it. Hello?
Hello, who's this?
Is this Brian?
Brian?
I was trying to reach Max Urich.
Who's calling?
This is Jason Goodman. Is this Max? So I don't know if that is Max Urich. I'll reveal now that the name on the packages outside that apartment was Brian Good. And Holly Urich's married name is Holly Good. So I don't know who that was on the phone, but wasn't that a perfect opportunity? If Maxwell Urich is pissed off that I've been talking about him and accusing him of being the assassin, wouldn't he have said, "Oh, Jason Goodman, you're the idiot who thinks that I did this and that"? Why wouldn't he just say, "Hey, stop calling me, stop going to my mother's apartment, leave me alone"? Why wouldn't he post something? He had a Facebook account, he had a Twitter account, he was all over DeviantArt. Why not post anything at all saying I wasn't in Butler, Pennsylvania? I don't know what Roger Stone is talking about. Maybe he doesn't even know who I am. It doesn't make sense, does it, Roger?
No, here's what we do know. Whoever attempted to shoot President Trump is definitely dead. I do wonder why the counter sniper, if he got him in his sights, the shooter, why he waited until the shooter got off 8 rounds before taking him out. I believe, based on my research, that the shooter was actually hit by a sheriff's deputy first, which kind of knocked him back when a Secret Service counter shooter shot him. So it just seems to me you have a perfect storm here of errors or incompetence by the Secret Service that created this possibility. And obviously, like the rest of the country, I breathed a lot easier when I learned that the president had survived. But I'll tell you what is aggravating. You'll see this all the time on social media. People who say that this entire event was somehow staged, an attempt to gain sympathy for Donald Trump prior to the election. The proof, of course, that that's false is the fact that Corey Comparatore, a firefighter who had the unfortunate situation of being on the stage near the president, was shot and killed. What's particularly aggravating is when people accuse me of having orchestrated this as some kind of false flag to generate sympathy for Donald Trump. Categorically false and extremely irresponsible. Again, I don't think either you, Jason, or we are not accusing Maxwell Urich. We are asking a question. We're asking whether it is possible that he is the shooter. We're asking whether it has been investigated. We're asking where he is and why he hasn't come public in a very big way to deny that he has any involvement. And the fact that his sister would reach out to you, but not Maxwell Urich himself. And then that very strange phone call where as soon as you ask, is this Max? He hangs up, or whoever answers the phone hangs up. Very curious. If it were not, why would they say, no, this is not him, or this is so and so? Again, I think the whole thing it bears more investigation.
I agree completely. Now, I don't know if you had seen that I obtained the unredacted police report from the Beaver County ESU. They had delivered an after-action report to Chuck Grassley's office, and I did just a normal FOIA. In Pennsylvania, it's called the Right to Know Act, and I just did a normal RTK request, and I'm certain they must have made a mistake because they sent me a completely unredacted version of this report. It gave me the names of the officers. This photograph was taken by Greg Nickel. It gave me the phone numbers of various federal agents who had been involved. You mentioned earlier that there was a drone operator who was on site. I've spoken to that guy. Have you heard this phone call with Rafael Eduardo Castro, the counter UAS operator? Let me play it for you.
Can you hear me? Eduardo? Eduardo, is that you? Can you hear me? Is that Eduardo?
Who's speaking?
It's Jason. How are you, man?
I'm sorry, it's who?
It's Jason. I wanted to ask you about the drone you were flying in Butler, Pennsylvania. Was it an Andeville counter UAS drone? And why has your name been hidden?
Oh, I'm sorry, who do you work for?
I don't work for anybody. This is Jason. I work for myself. You were the drone operator, the counter UAS drone operator, right? Is this Special Agent Eduardo Castro? Have
Who
I
do you work
reached?
for?
Have I
How
reached
did you get this number?
Eduardo Castro? I don't work for anyone. I have a show called Crowdsource the Truth. You were the drone operator during the Donald Trump assassination attempt, right? What was the function of the drone you were flying?
Sir, there's a government phone number for official business only. Do not call this number again.
He didn't seem too pleased to hear from me, did he?
No, he certainly did.
That's interesting, though, isn't it? I mean, they had told us nothing about a counter drone operator prior to this phone call. That was initially September 14th, 2024. So there were all these names. I had also a phone call with the ATF agent from Philadelphia. I'm sure you recall Senator Ron Johnson said, I think the following day, that someone from the ATF had instructed local law enforcement to text a photograph of the dead suspect to a particular phone number. And the ear, you mentioned the ear. Unfortunately, I can't show that photograph because our video will be taken off of YouTube if I do that, but people can go to X. I've got the photograph posted on X. And there is a very distinctive anatomical feature on the outer helix, I believe they call it, of Thomas Crooks's right ear. And he's got two nodules, two bumps of cartilage on his ear that are visible in videos of Thomas Crooks going as far back as his days in high school. Some friends of his posted a video. They're just horsing around in a classroom, and Thomas Crooks is looking around, and he's got these two bumps on his ear. The photograph in this unredacted police report does show two bumps on the ear, but I pointed out technical evidence. My expertise in digital imaging allowed me to identify errors that caused me to believe the photograph had been edited in Photoshop. And I started a lawsuit against the Beaver County ESU to obtain the original photographs from Detective Richard Gianvito's iPhone. They had presented this photograph in a very odd resolution, which was part of how I determined that it had been altered, and I was requesting the original iPhone photo. In a body cam video, we see Detective Gianvito looking at this photograph on an iPhone. It's at least an iPhone 11 or higher. So I know the resolution that camera photographs at. And when I asked the police to provide that original photo, certainly if it was not Maxwell Yerrick, and if I were a conspiracy theorist and this theory were stupid, the police should want to provide that evidence and prove me wrong. They fought me tooth and nail, Roger. I had to drive to the court, the Commonwealth Court in Pittsburgh, something like 4 times, spent a lot of time and money, and they fought me with, attorneys, would not give the original photograph.
Yeah, the whole thing is very curious, but it's the same thing we saw, of course, in the Kennedy assassination, where thanks to the efforts of Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna and the recently resigned Director of National Intelligence, an enormous amount of information that was held back from investigators regarding the assassination of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think we're going to learn a great deal more. I think the situation is in many ways analogous. Seems to be a tremendous rush to judgment by the FBI to say that Thomas Matthew Crooks is the shooter. He acted alone. They couldn't crack his cell phone. I find that unlikely. Now this new information regarding a transmitter being found on him. Again, I commend you for citizen investigation here. Once again, neither of us are saying definitively that the shooter was Maxwell Yerrick. We're asking a question. We're not making an accusation. But I am curious about the fact that he hasn't come forward to clear his name, since this is, as the AI says, this is an internet conspiracy.
Yeah, and I also, in my investigation, went to his mother's apartment. Sorry, there's one more thing I wanted to bring to your attention, because you and I have also spoken about this treacherous coward, Andrew Weissman, and he's not really directly involved in this as far as I know, but I don't recall if you and I specifically have discussed this cooperation agreement that Andrew Weissman signed with a guy named Felix Sater. I'm sure you're familiar, at least by name, with Felix Sater.
Yes, I am familiar with that issue.
And you know about this cooperation agreement, right?
Yes, I do.
So the thing that I find interesting about this and potentially relevant to the whole Urich situation, here we see this thing was signed. Here's Andrew Weissman's signature, defendant Felix Sater's signature. This was signed in 1998 in Brooklyn, New York, where at the time Andrew Weissman was the assistant U.S. attorney. He had just taken over Valerie Caproni, who today is a U.S. District Court judge here in the Southern District of New York. She leaves in the end of September. Weissman takes over in the beginning of December, and this cooperation agreement with Sater is signed December 10th. Now, when I asked Felix Sater if he knew Valerie Caproni and if she was aware of this cooperation agreement, he said, of course. He said he also said that, of course, TWA Flight 800 was shot down by a Stinger missile that had originally been disseminated to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and that Bill Clinton assigned Sater to go to try to recover. I find that amazing that a low-level criminal, kind of a dope from Brooklyn, would know where missiles are in Afghanistan, but whatever, that's another question for another day. The reason I bring all of this up is because, as you pointed out, Maxwell Urich has a rather extensive criminal record, and he too entered into a plea arrangement. We have that listed on here. So a guilty plea negotiated right here in 2017. And this is Maxwell Urich's criminal record here. We see right there, Maxwell David Urich. And I just wonder, because, people have said, my friend, I don't know if you know this guy, but I think you might be interested to speak to him. Ken Silva has written a book about the assassination attempts, and he asked a valid question that a lot of people might have, which is, if Maxwell Urich were the shooter, why would they want to hide such a thing? And I would suggest, Roger, that if Maxwell Urich entered into some sort of plea arrangement to do some sort of top secret stuff, Felix Sater tells us he was a confidential human informant for the CIA, the DIA, the FBI, helped hunt Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan. Who knows what type of illegal things Felix Sater was authorized to do. He seemed to be hunting Donald Trump in Trump Tower with the whole Stormy Daniels nonsense and his emails to Michael Cohen. But what might Maxwell Urich have been compelled to do if he were a confidential human informant?
It's a valid question, and one that as I say, the whole matter here bears further examination. Now, look, somebody was definitely shot and killed in addition to Corey Comparatori, and therefore the shooter, whoever that person is no longer with us. Therefore, if Maxwell Urich was indeed the shooter, Maxwell Urich is no longer walking the earth. Once again, I'm not saying he is the shooter. I'm not claiming he is the shooter. I'm asking the question based on a tip and some pretty solid investigative reporting on your part. I just find it curious that he has not come forward with any kind of public denial. Why would his sister contact you, or someone claiming to be a sister, rather than himself? I find the entire thing very curious, as well as this series of mistakes or missteps by the U.S. Secret Service. Shocking, in fact.
Yeah. And I know you certainly can't speak for other people, but it's perplexing that Donald Trump himself doesn't seem more curious about finding the answers here. Do you have any insights into any ongoing investigations? It seems like the investigation is closed.
I don't. The president seems to be satisfied with the FBI's conclusion that Thomas Matthew Crooks is the shooter. I have not had occasion to speak to him about this topic directly, and therefore I couldn't comment on what he thinks other than what he has said publicly.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I'm asking you to speak on behalf of other people, which you obviously can't do, but I know you're pretty close friends with Jack Posobiec, who also wrote a book about this topic. Jack became incredibly perturbed. I thought he and I had a good relationship prior to this interaction, but I asked him why he hadn't said anything. I said about the second shooter, I should have specifically said Max Urich, but he became immediately irritated, lied to the NYPD to try to get me arrested, which I found very offensive. Do you have any idea why Jack is so reluctant to even mention Urich? Have you ever discussed Maxwell Urich with Jack Posobiec?
Never discussed the matter. Jack is a friend of mine, and we've never discussed the matter. So beyond that, Jason, I'm not going to comment.
I understand completely. Well, Roger, I really appreciate you taking the time this morning. I want to make sure people know they can follow you on X at Roger J. Stone Jr. You're constantly tweeting incredibly interesting information, including this stuff about Maxwell Urich. I certainly wouldn't know about him if it weren't for you. So thank you very much for that. You also have got your Stone Cold Truth website that people can go to. You've got a radio show on WABC radio that people can listen to. And of course, the Roger Stone collection of fine menswear. Anything else you want to discuss before?
So people can go to stonezone.com, stonezone.com. If you're interested in my menswear collection, go to rogerstonesuits.com, where we have just introduced our spring summer line. This is kind of a side hobby, but the best place to get all things Roger Stone is at stonezone.com. Jason, thanks for the opportunity to be on with you and talk about this vexing subject.
I appreciate your time, Roger.